So, Charlotte, this looks like a protest over COVID restrictions, but is this what is actually happening?
Well, Aaron, yes and no. It's about COVID restrictions, but in terms of how they relate to working conditions, not about personal freedoms as we might expect with our point of view from people here in the West. Some context first. This plant is the world's largest iPhone factory with over 200,000 workers. It's run by Foxconn, which is Apple's main subcontractor when it comes to constructing these devices. And they experienced an outbreak of COVID at the end of last month. And during that outbreak, we saw a poor treatment of employees, including insufficient provision of food for these employees. And this forced many of these often poorly paid or low-wage workers to flee the plant, to go on a mass exodus. And since then, Foxconn has pulled out all the stops to try and get people back and to get production back on track. And they've promised higher wages. They've promised rehiring bonuses for these people to come back. Interestingly enough as well, we've seen the local government in Henan province ask local party cadres in the province to volunteer their time to go to work in that factory as well. So it's not just Foxconn, it's the government as well that's concerned about production happening there. And this leads us to now into these scenes that we've seen in Zhengzhou overnight. We've seen the first, in the initial reporting we're seeing is protesters complaining about the poor protection from COVID in the plant, which is cut off from the outside world in a closed-loop system. So it's about implementation of COVID restrictions. There are reports of healthy workers having to share rooms with workers who have COVID, for instance. That's a big point of contention. Then there's also the concern about poor food or insufficient food and unpaid bonuses, once again. So all this is contributing, at least according to the initial reporting, to the scenes that we're seeing now. And obviously, it's also leading to Apple and Foxconn saying that we're expecting lower shipments of iPhones ahead of the Christmas season.
Now, Charles, those concerns about the COVID restrictions are all the more ironic given China's draconian zero COVID policy, which brings us to a wider issue that the government is struggling with, how to keep those strict rules while not affecting economic output as well.
Absolutely. This protest is really happening at an interesting moment for China and its zero COVID policy, or dynamic zero COVID policy as it's officially known. Daily COVID cases in the country are over 28,000, which is a huge level for China. Around the time this time last year, we had that level in Shanghai, and they opted for a full lockdown of the city. But since the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, we've seen a bit of a new approach on zero COVID, perhaps more flexible. They've promised to do things that wouldn't hinder economic output as much. And we've seen measures like reducing quarantine for international arrivals in China as well. That could suggest that maybe China was turning the leaf when it comes to this policy a little bit. But now, tested with this rise in cases again, will this actually continue, or will they decide to implement harsh lockdowns on big cities like we've seen in the past? And this would be really the only way to get back to zero COVID at this point in time. If they don't do that, then we're in new territory for China, where they're basically allowing the virus to circulate half freely around the country. And this, we don't know what this would do. Will the Chinese health system be able to cope? Has the Chinese vaccination drive with locally made vaccines been efficient enough? Then we'll be able to find out. But the international business community has already taken note of and has already taken measures with China's zero COVID policy. We've seen Apple, for instance, deciding that they're diversifying their supply chains and their supply lines. Sure, they're keeping the plant in Zhengzhou for the Chinese market, but increasingly iPads are being built in Vietnam, and other factories are being set up in India as well. So this is really a crucial moment for China's position as the factory of the world.
Certainly with a lot of ramifications, not only at China, but abroad. As you say, Charles Pellegrin, we'll keep it there for now. Thank you very much.